Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled you're here with us today. So we're actually going to set aside the usual lighthearted banter for this one because we're taking a highly focused, clinical look at a topic that honestly affects almost every single human being at some point in their lives. We're unraveling the mechanics of psychological manipulation. Now, I know it's a heavy, serious subject, but understanding this, the anatomy of influence, it's literally one of the most empowering things you can possibly do for yourself.
I want you to really think about this for a second. Are your decisions truly your own? Or are you being subtly controlled? It's kind of an unsettling thought, right? But the truth is, psychological control is pervasive. And its most dangerous quality? It's often completely invisible to the person experiencing it. So to defend your mind, you've got to be able to see those invisible strings.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's how we're breaking it down. 1. Defining psychological manipulation. 2. Neurobiology of social influence. 3. The Dark Triad traits. 4. Tactics, gaslighting and control. And finally, 5. Defending against manipulation. We're going to peel back the layers from broad definitions all the way down to the physical brain, and finally, to practical defenses.
Section 1. Defining psychological manipulation. First things first, we need to draw a really clear line between everyday social interactions and malicious control. Clinically speaking, psychological manipulation is an action designed to intentionally influence or control another person in an underhanded or subtle manner, strictly for self-serving aims. Now, why does this distinction matter? Well, humans are naturally social creatures, right? We influence each other all the time. But normal, healthy influence involves what we call pro-social behavior. These are voluntary acts driven by empathy that actually benefit others. Manipulation, on the other hand, totally strips away that empathy and transparency. It's basically influence weaponized for selfish gain.
Researchers, like evolutionary psychologist David Buss, have systematically categorized how people actively shape their social environments. Through some pretty extensive studies, they nailed down 6 primary manipulation tactics. People might use charm to initiate a behavior they want, or maybe coercion and the silent treatment to force a behavior to stop. They might try reason or revert to childlike regression, or even use debasement, literally lowering themselves to get a desired reaction. The big takeaway here is that manipulation isn't just some random accident, it's an active, highly calculated shaping of someone else's reality.
Section 2. Neurobiology of social influence. Now, before we look at the psychological profiles of those who manipulate, we kind of have to look in the mirror. Why is the human brain biologically wired to be influenced by others in the first place? It's a fascinating question, and it bridges the gap between abstract psychology and the hard neurobiology of our social brains. Evolutionarily speaking, our survival literally depended on our ability to align with the group, learn from each other, and adapt to social norms.
And this brilliantly illustrates the actual hardware of conformity. Our brains quite literally form our sense of self by integrating social expectations through very specific neurochemical pathways. The 5-HT, or serotonin system, is absolutely central to social cognition and adaptation. Meanwhile, your medial prefrontal cortex is just working overtime processing social information, while dopamine and oxytocin drive our reward systems when we successfully align with our peers. So a manipulator doesn't just attack your thoughts, they are literally hacking into these deep-seated biological systems that were designed to make you conform.
Section 3. The Dark Triad traits.
Now let's shift our focus to the perpetrators who are most likely to exploit that biology, basically the anatomy of a predator. We're grounding our analysis here firmly in academic research, specifically drawing from studies on socially aversive traits published in the International Journal of Indian Psychology. It's absolutely crucial to understand that these traits aren't just found in, cartoon villains. They exist on a continuum within the general population. You interact with people exhibiting these traits every single day.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is how it contrasts the different motivators for the Dark Triad, which is a cluster of 3 distinct malevolent personality traits. While they all share a manipulative core, their drivers differ wildly. Machiavellians? They are your cold, strategic planners. For them, the ends always justify the means, driven purely by self-interest with zero empathy. Narcissists operate from this place of grandiosity and entitlement, using charm specifically to feed their inflated ego. And then we have psychopathy, characterized by a rash, guiltless, and socially hostile approach, often relying on direct coercion and total emotional coldness.
To really grasp how these traits operate, we have to talk about empathy, but we've got to split it into 2 types. Affective empathy is feeling what others feel, and this is universally low across all 3 Dark Triad traits. They just don't care about your pain. But cognitive empathy, that's the ability to understand what others feel.
Now, psychopaths lack both entirely, which is why they often just resort to blunt force coercion. But narcissists and Machiavellians, they can actually retain high cognitive empathy. They understand your emotions perfectly well. They just use that understanding as a blueprint to better manipulate you.
Let's look at how this actually plays out in intimate, long-term relationships, specifically through the lens of Machiavellianism. Research shows these individuals use manipulation as an evolutionary mating strategy. Sure, this includes deception for short-term gains, but in long-term dynamics, it manifests as routine emotional manipulation, withholding commitment, and a significantly higher risk of sexual coercion and resource control. They'll frequently use defection threats, threatening to just leave the relationship entirely, as a way to enforce total compliance from their partner. It's a calculated, cold game of interpersonal dominance.
Section 4. Tactics, gaslighting, and control.
Let's move to this process and see how this builds into the systematic tactics manipulators deploy. Coercive control is almost never just a single explosive event. No, it's a slow, methodical erosion of your freedom. It starts with isolation, slowly cutting you off from friends and family so the abuser literally becomes your only reality. Then comes micromanaging, dictating what you wear, when you sleep, your daily routines. This is followed by persistent humiliation to just destroy your self-worth. By step 4, the victim is in a state of total dependence. It is a silent prison, built brick by brick.
And one of the primary mortars holding those bricks together is gaslighting. Clinically speaking, gaslighting is a covert form of emotional abuse where the abuser constantly denies reality, literally forcing the victim to question their own memory, identity, and sanity. Psychological literature sometimes refers to the result of this as the mind's knot theory. Basically, the victim develops this tangled network of detrimental emotional knots because their reality is being aggressively and constantly distorted by someone they trust.
But listen, manipulation isn't just confined to romantic relationships or the home. These tactics scale up seamlessly. In the workplace, manipulators will disguise aggression as good intentions, subtly criticizing peers to stir up disparate groups and climb the ladder over the chaos. In destructive religious or cult groups, leaders use collectivism and emotional stabilization to indoctrinate individuals and break down independent thought. And on a sociological level, these tactics exploit existing power relations and gender stereotypes, making the manipulation systemic rather than just one-on-one.
The toll this takes on a human being? It's absolutely devastating. Victims of prolonged gaslighting and coercive control frequently develop complex post-traumatic stress disorder. They live in this state of severe anxiety and constant hypervigilance, just waiting for the next psychological blow. This leads to major depression, profound disorientation, and a completely diminished sense of self and reality. The bruises from psychological manipulation might be invisible, but make no mistake, the scars are permanent.
Section 5. Defending against psychological manipulation. All right, let's pivot and focus on actionable, defensive takeaways to protect your mind. I want you to read this quote from the Dark Psychology Lab with me. Manipulation works by turning your emotional reaction into leverage. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. The foundation of all psychological defense is managing your own emotional response. The manipulator is actively trying to poke you, to make you angry, sad, or defensive, because the second you react emotionally, you literally hand them the joystick to your brain.
When it comes to defense, you have to be incredibly careful not to become the monster you're fighting. We need to clearly distinguish between safe strategies and high-risk tactics. Safe strategies mean building your internal stability, understanding ironclad boundaries, and recognizing those destructive patterns. But high-risk tactics, that's trying to out-manipulate the manipulator, mirroring their toxic behavior, using social engineering, or engaging in their power struggle. Because our brains are neurologically primed for adaptation, if you play their game, you risk getting trapped inside their fog and adapting to their toxicity until you lose yourself entirely.
Instead, rely on these core behavioral defenses. First, identify the game. When you can mentally name a tactic in real time, like, oh, that's love bombing, or they're attempting a smear campaign, you instantly strip that tactic of its power. Second, maintain internal stability. Take away their leverage by not providing the emotional reaction they're digging for. Become a gray rock. And third, especially in workplace environments, use structured communication. Keep things documented, brief, and completely emotionless. With experience, spotting and disarming a manipulator becomes an automatic, highly effective skill.
We have journeyed all the way from the neurobiological wiring of the human brain to the dark personalities that seek to exploit it, and finally, to the tactical shields you can use to defend yourself. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Now that you know the rules of the game, How will you protect your mind tomorrow? Knowledge is absolutely your first line of defense. Keep learning, stay observant, and never let anyone tell you that your reality isn't real. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay focused,